Hi, and welcome to the Human Side of Business podcast. I'm Ange, MacCabe, CEO and co-founder of Intuitive Performance. I'm a performance coach, HR professional, whole person leadership facilitator, and your host. The Human Side of Business podcast is fueled by the genuine curiosity to understand how personal characteristics and skills can be leveraged to drive individual and team performance, tangible outcomes, and ultimately organizational success within business. Each podcast is devoted to sharing knowledge, expanding our learning edges, and exploring the trends in corporate culture towards growing the emotional intelligence of organizations. I'm so glad you're here. Hi, and a warm welcome to the Elevate Business podcast. Both myself, Ange MacCabe, and Scott Russ are your hosts. We have the pleasure of introducing you to the CEO and co-founder of Ideon Technologies. Gary is a global executive with 25 plus years in the industrial B2B markets, developing and commercializing innovative new products, services, and solutions. Hi, Gary. It's so great to have you here.
Hey, it's great to be here, Ange, and Scott, thanks very much for the invitation.
Yeah, no worries. So, Gary, tell us a little bit more about yourself, your journey, and your current role. We're excited to hear it.
Sure. Yeah, I'm originally from the UK. I've been in Canada now since 2013. And so my wife and I have become citizens here in Canada. So I'm pretty excited about that over the last 12 months or so. And yeah, my journey, I spent over 20 years of my career working for the world's largest capital equipment dealer. And the last 10 years of my career with the company was as an executive. And really, took the opportunity at the end of 2018 to switch gears. Really was looking for a different challenge for the second half of my career, if you will. I left then searching for a technology startup business, really to have the opportunity to apply my skills in a very different context. And so today I'm the CEO and co-founder of Ideon Technologies. We are a world pioneer in the use of cosmic ray neon tomography. And so just to double click on that a little bit, our technology, very, very analogous to medical imaging. And so if you think about a 2D X-ray image or a 3D CAT scan image, our technology essentially follows the same similar process, but we're imaging beneath the Earth's surface. So very helpful for mining companies, oil and gas, geotechnical assessments, and so forth.
Thank you for explaining that. I had no idea what that word meant.
You saw both their faces like, yeah. Okay.
I'm like, do I act cool about this or do I ask a question? So thank you for sharing.
No problem at all.
Yeah. So when it comes to, looking at it from a leadership perspective, we're always curious about the leadership journey on itself. Tell us what type of switches you've kind of jumped into from a leadership perspective, going from, executive to being that entrepreneur and CEO?
Yeah, maybe the first switch I'd share with you is really if I reflect on my career. And the first half of my career was quite typical, I guess. Very hierarchically orientated organization. The boss was expected to know all the answers. The team were expected to kind of follow the boss. It was so quite a traditional hierarchical organizational model. And so for me, in the middle of my career, around 2010, 2012, as I was becoming an executive, I got the opportunity to benefit some really first-class training, development, coaching that really helped me shift the frame on which I looked at the organization and looked at the challenges and looked at the team through. And really the second half, and I guess the label I put to it, it's aspirational leadership. And really the second half of my career has been much more about aspirational leadership and taking on the challenges that maybe others think are impossible and finding a way to deliver on those bold objectives.
I'd love to dive into that a little bit further, Gary. And so could you maybe explain to some of the listeners, in your version, what is aspirational leadership? And then double clicking a little further as to what has the impact actually been that you've seen with your team and kind of adapting that style?
Yes. Sure. So for me, aspirational leadership is we have a tendency to think and operate incrementally. And for me, aspirational leadership is about putting yourself in the future, 5 years out, 10 years out, whatever the appropriate timeline, and actually painting yourself a picture of the way you want the world to look in your business, in your market, and then really stepping back from that vision to create annual and quarterly targets based on it. And the challenge with aspirational leadership is when you do it that way around, the objectives and the challenges become quite large quite quickly. And that's very uncomfortable. Because normally we're all used to and we've seen the kind of small incremental changes and a huge hockey stick in the final year of the plan.
Right.
Well, this approach actually forces the bigger shifts in performance earlier in the plan. So that's quite an uncomfortable experience if that's not the way you've been used to working. Your question, Scott, around the impact of that leadership, it's night and day in my experience. The level of performance, the level of engagement of the team end up delivering things that they previously thought were impossible. That sounds very dramatic. But in the real world, it's about setting off with big objectives and then going after them like your life depends on it. And there's an amazing space where the human mind gets freed from the current constraints and starts to think possibilities. And really that's the space where, at one time impossible things are achieved. Nelson Mandela has had a great quote. It always seems impossible until it's done. And that's really, very eloquently articulates the beginning of the journey. The mountains seem so large and difficult to overcome. But at the end of the journey, the impossible has been delivered.
I'm really intrigued by this thought process around aspirational leadership. Because there's a lot of buzzwords going around, of course, these days. Like we know that there's 27 different types of leadership styles, ranging from, archaical, hierarchical types of leadership, all the way up to, learnership and what you're saying, aspirational leadership or transformational leadership, et cetera, et cetera. And so leaning into what you're saying, Gary, how do you help create not just a mind shift in your leadership team, but all staff? Because that would be a substantial shift across your whole organization.
Yes. First and most importantly is creating a safe environment and being very clear that there's two performance levels. There's the hard commitment, which is, as a leader, is the thing I want to take to the bank. Yep. And then there's the aspirational goal. And it's recognizing there are actually two different objectives. The one that is a commitment and that you're holding people accountable for. And the other one is where people are shooting for the moon and stars. And if they don't achieve that, that's okay. That's okay. Actually, the safety culture is acknowledging and celebrating that they had the courage to actually go after the lofty goal. And when it doesn't work out, that's okay. What did we learn from that experience and how do we apply that to get it next time? And so that commitment and aspirational goal, understanding those two different outcomes and managing accordingly to those outcomes is very, very important.
I like where you're going with that, Gary, because what I'm hearing is, for you from an aspirational leadership perspective, gone are the days of, start and stop goals. And you must hit 100%, or we're going to have a discussion as to why you haven't hit 100%, but rather transferring it to the perspective of let's agree upon something that's abundantly clear. And where's the marker of being quote unquote okay or successful for a goal? And then, by the way, let's be creative and think about, in a perfect world, what does this stretch goal look like? And of course, we're going to shoot for that, and then hope for the agreed upon at the end of the day, and then continue that process forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's certainly the leader's role in the goal setting exercise, and also in the process and the goal delivery exercise. But actually causes the leader to be quite different through that process. And so through that process, my role becomes, what do you need to get to the goal? How do I help them get the tools, the resources? Could be headcount, could be investment, could be all sorts of things that are enabler of getting to the goal.
Yeah.
But then, my role is to remove those blockers and give the team members, a free runway, not a free runway, but give them a runway to go after those unencumbered. Typically what I've seen before is, people get committed on the big lofty goal, and then the second sentence is, yeah, but you can have half the resources you asked for to go and deliver it. And immediately there's a disconnect. Immediately there's a disconnect in the person who's going after the goal, because it's like, well, I told you what I needed, and you want me to achieve this big goal, but you've just undermined what I need by cutting it in half. That's not a good agreement between the leader and the member of the team. It's much more around agreeing what conditions give us the ability to achieve this goal, and then as the leader with the team member, figuring out how we get those things in place.
Exactly. And Scott, what comes up for me is like a lot of conversations that you and I have been having around shifting the thought process to more of check-ins versus, one-time performance, objective setting parameters. And one thing that Scott brought to the table last time around was, leaders are intrigued by this type of process of setting those stretch goals and setting objectives that are clear and agreed upon. But there's a mentality that we've seen come out where it's like, but we've never done it this way, and I feel uncomfortable. And I'm not understanding this. This feels like more work. Why are you giving me more work, Gary? Right. So, how do you help your team members adjust to thinking from that strategic perspective?
I think first and foremost, because I was in their shoes when I first started working this way, and I remember very vividly how uncomfortable it was. Because the whole paradigm before this approach was to incrementalize. It was to keep it tight so that you could deliver.
Right.
And so I remember very distinctly the level of discomfort stepping into this realm. And what was most uncomfortable for me was the uncertainty of how I was going to be treated given a different level of performance. How was I going to be treated between the commitment and the aspirational? Was everything above the commitment going to be an acknowledgement and a recognition that you shot higher and achieved more? Or was it going to be seen as a failure because you didn't get to the aspirational goal? So I remember living through that kind of fear in a corporate organization. And therefore, as I'm imparting this learning to my team, I'm very mindful of this. This can sound a little bit crazy, that we're going to go after goals that we have no idea how we're going to meet. And, the fact of actually setting the big goal as part of achieving the big goal, that's a very disorientating conversation first time out. I mean, ultimately, people come in with a lot of skepticism. The thing that really makes the difference is evidence, is proving, through the team's performance, that they are delivering far more than they thought possible. And it's, like all of us, once you have more and more traction and evidence that actually this is delivering what, of course, your confidence and belief in the process works.
It's funny, Gary, you bring up the idea around evidence, because even for myself, I guess getting a little vulnerable here, I've struggled at times with that mindset shift around more thinking aspirationally. I know Ange has pushed me in that direction to try and think more aspirationally, where my default is logical. It is numbers. It is more that incremental thinking. And that's where I feel comfortable. I see that working. And I'd say over the past 3 to 6 months now, that has changed for me, where I think the key factor was the evidence piece. When I saw, hey, these tiny things that we did over here led to this. And all I have to do is just 10x those things that we did, and it would allow us to reach 10x of what we're looking for. Okay, now I get it. Now I can actually move forward to it because I see the evidence kind of in place. So I completely get it from that perspective in terms of helping making those mindset shifts. And I can imagine encouraging and showing team members the shifts that they're making and what they're accomplishing over time. It becomes credible as a leader.
One of the techniques we use is about making this visible, and ensure people are present to what's actually happening. So at our leadership meeting each month, we start the agenda with a roses and thorns sessions. What were the roses, the great things that happened in the last month, and what were the thorns? And what blows my mind every time is we've got a list of 15, 20, 25 roses each month and 3, 4, 5 thorns.
Wow.
And so for me, and you have to kind of look at what we're achieving. This is
That's
ridiculous.
amazing.
We have no right to be achieving what we are with the size of the team that we actually are. So, ensuring the team are present to what's actually happening.
Yeah.
And acknowledging the accomplishments as they're happening in real time.
Yeah. And acknowledging what you just had said too, Scott, in that different team members need to be communicated in different ways, I think is a huge undertone that I'm hearing here. It's, if we're going to make this huge culture shift around performance and moving from a place of transactional to aspirational, it's really understanding what your team members need to feel safe, to lean into this type of mindset shift or process shift.
Yeah, it definitely is. And this is a high touch, high coaching environment. That when things are happening in the field of play, the closer to the thing that happened, that you can debrief and coach and give different perspectives, the more valuable the learning is, the more real it becomes for the team. And so, and that's uncomfortable too, because generally people aren't used to getting feedback on a daily basis about their performance.
Right.
It's just not. The way I was brought up, you could go for a year before you got feedback about your performance. So,
no news is good news. Yeah.
And so again, the first times when that's happening, again, it can be an intimidating experience for team members. But again, in a safe environment, as the leader, you're authentic, you're consistent in terms of your approach, and they can see the coaching and advice that you're offering starting to deliver benefits to them and the wider team, then again, people come on board and generally carry
When you're talking about high touch coach approach, and tell our listeners a little bit more as to what that means, because there's it's a bit of a wild, wild west in the coaching arena, as we know, anywhere from, the sporting style of coaching all the way up to executive coaching. And there's different modalities there in between. So what does that mean for your organization at Ideon?
Yes, I mean, just in the last week, a couple of different meetings I was involved with the team, and things happened in the meeting, and I could see impacts in the room from the way a particular member of the team was engaging. And you can kind of see the retraction of the rest of the audience becoming passive, not wanting to fully engage.
Okay.
And so, taking that example, debrief immediately after, tell me how that meeting went. How did that go for you? What did you observe? And so my role is asking questions and kind of establish how was that experience for the team member. And then once they've kind of laid it out, I'll typically offer some other perspectives that I observed in the meeting and the resultant impact of those things that happened. And so what generally happens is within a 10, 15-minute conversation, we've been able together to bring new clarity to what was happening in that moment, both inside the leader in terms of what was going on in his or her mind, but also what the dynamic was created as a result of that with the other members of that meeting. And then by diagnosing it quickly, you give people real feedback. It's not conceptual feedback. It's like, at this moment, this happened, and this is what I immediately see in the audience. And so people are able to relate to that much, much better than some, feedback about something that happened 6 months ago that I've been storing up in my mind. It's not very helpful, 6 months later.
I understand you, yeah.
I think this is a great segue as well, Gary. I'd love to learn a little bit more. What type or how are you nurturing your team's professional growth, recognizing that they're working in this uncomfortable environment at times and they're getting pushed left, right, and center to continue to kind of push themselves forward? So how are you supporting them in that way?
Yeah, I mean that's my role. It's sleeves rolled up. It's full contact sport. I'm not the CEO that sits in the corner office It's being in the field of play with the team, understanding where the issues are, and helping them remove blocks. It's an old kind of adage, removing roadblocks, but it's so powerful because what happens is when I'm able to help remove roadblocks, you create this clear path for people to go and do their best work instead of focusing all their time on the things that are constraining them doing their best work. So for me, that's a huge part of my role as a leader. I think also to operate in this way, you need to be very courageous, because what you're actually doing is stretching your organization way, way, way beyond its comfort zone. And therefore, when you're doing that stretching, it's not okay to stretch and then leave the organization to it. And you've got to be there as the number one cheerleader. You've got to be there as the number one coach. You've got to be there as the number one block remover. You've got to be very, very active with the team to resolve issues. And again, the more you're able to play that role, the more confidence the team has that you're there to back them. You're not there to pick fault. You're not there to point to everything that's gone wrong. You're there, you're on their side, and you're backing them 110%. And when you create that environment, suddenly, people start to gain more confidence about their own ability. So much of this is things happen in our lives that create blocks in our mind in terms of what we individually can achieve. Sometimes you live in an organization that in some way institutionalizes you and causes you to limit what you think you're capable of. And so my role is, when I'm pushing people to achieve more, is also help them achieve more. And then the more that cycle happens, the more confidence, the more freeing it is, the more they want to take on. So it's a challenging environment. It's a very energizing environment once the flywheel starts to take effect.
Definitely, for sure. And what's coming up for me in that is, how do you identify amongst your team members when to jump in and when to kind of sit back? Because that's an art and a bit of a dance.
Yeah, I think as you touched on before, Ange, I think it's different by team members. Some team members do best by just getting their head down on a problem, really, disconnecting, giving it 100% focus, and they will get there. Other team members, and I'm one of these team members, I like a more participative, iterative process. I don't have all the best ideas, far from it. And being able to be in a team environment where one person, has an idea, someone else builds on it, someone adds to it. For me, being in that sort of environment, I personally find very energizing. But some of the team members need that. Others just need you to create the space and time for them to go and do their best work. And leave them alone. Stop interfering, get out of the way, let them go and figure it out. So very, very different by team member.
Oh, that's fantastic, Gary. And it's interesting. We've been talking over the past 20 plus minutes, and I feel we keep circling around this idea around human skills or soft skills, right? And so I'm curious, what role do those soft skills play when bringing on new team members onto the team?
Yeah, the kind of the EQ, if you will. You end up becoming very self-aware, very situationally aware. Body language is such a powerful tool in terms of understanding what's really going on in the room rather than what's being spoken about. And so for me, as new team members come into the team, I'm using my sensory skills. I'm observing, I'm detecting, kind of feelings, listening to the words, of course, and trying to get a picture, because the more alert I can be to what's going on for any new member of the team, particularly, the quicker I can adapt the situation or fill a need or remove a block for that individual. You have to have your eyes open, your ears open, and you have to be paying attention to really understand what's the unspoken dialogue in the room.
Yeah, insightful for sure. Thank you, Gary. So we like to ask all of our podcast guests, what are some words of inspiration that you would want the world to hear?
I do want to go back to the Nelson Mandela quote.
Okay.
It is my favorite. It always seems impossible until it's done. And just for me, it captures the two sides of this aspirational journey we're talking about. The first side, when the steepness of the mountain just looks and feels, and all the rational thoughts in your mind are telling you this cannot be done. And yet, by following this type of process and having talented people and committing to it, there's a moment when you actually deliver. And so that speaks to the elation and the sense of accomplishment and the galvanizing experience that is for the team to have taken on something that to a person we're saying like, oh my God, we're never going to get this done, but then delivering it. And so for me, that's why it's my favorite quote, because it kind of talks to both sides of the mountain before you undertake the challenge and when you've accomplished it.
Yeah. And I can really hear your conviction and passion behind that, Gary. Thank you so much for sharing. And now that Scott has heard this, our next quarterly goal session will operate a lot differently. So we appreciate you, Gary. And thank you so much, seriously, for sharing all of your entrepreneurial and leadership insights with us, especially around this theme of aspirational leadership. It was great to discuss for sure.
Great. Thanks very much for having us on the show. And hopefully some of your listeners can pick some bits out of that and put it into practice.
Fantastic. And for those who would like to learn more about Ideon Technologies, we're going to provide a link to the company's profile on the Elevate Business podcast title page. Take good care. Thanks for listening to the Human Side of Business podcast. I'm glad you could join us. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to stay updated with our latest content, make sure to visit our website. The link can be found in the episode description, where you can subscribe to the podcast, sign up for our newsletter, and learn more about our whole person leadership services. Sounds interesting? Explore the Whole Person Leadership Cohort by Intuity Performance, a unique program that offers unparalleled support to managers on every step of their leadership journey. Our program features evidence-based assessments, workbooks, group coaching, and interactive learning experiences to help you level up your leadership skills. Reach out today to apply to one of our upcoming cohorts. Until next time, take care and stay curious.